Today is such a great day to wake up to hope. I promise you. Now, this is Rasheen Jamison-Richardson coming to you from my table called The Table of Redemption. This is my podcast. It was founded during my time at Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I am now a 2025 alumni. But listen, this came out of disaster, years spent trying to figure out what happens when you as a leader reach a decline and it seems like there's no more hope for you. But then again, there is. So this table of redemption says, in life, we know that tables do turn. So if that's the case, I need you to come to this table to find solutions. This series is called At the Table with the Masters.
Meet Dr. Elizabeth City, Senior Lecturer of Harvard Graduate School of Education. City has served as teacher, instructional coach, principal, and consultant in each role focused on helping all children and the educators who work with them realize their full potential. City's work is a combination of pragmatic, how can we do our work better every day for children now? And imaginative, what might learning and the systems that support learning look like in the not too distant future? City fell in love with teaching in a closet-turned classroom in St. Petersburg, Russia. She still loves teaching and sees leadership as a continuous act of learning and teaching. From her early passion for literacy as a middle school humanities teacher to her current work in developing leaders, common themes in City's work are collaboration, evidence-based discussions, asking the right questions, thinking and acting strategically, and learning through doing. Liz is an author and co-author of many publications, including MeetingWise, DataWise, Strategy in Action, Instructional Rounds in Education, Resourceful Leadership, The Teacher's Guide to Leading Student-Centered Discussions. Each of these have been published between 2006 and 2014. But what brings us here today to the Table of Redemption is her new release, Leading Strategically, Achieving Ambitious Goal in Education, co-authored with Rachel E. Curtis, who is not here with us today, but I wanted to make sure her face was shown. Let's take this interview into action as I go in and interview my colleague, my advisor, my friend, Dr. Elizabeth City. So Liz, what brings you to the table of redemption tonight?
Well, the first thing that brings me to the table is you. I think it's always worth noting that often what brings us to a table is relationships, right? And you and I got to know each other in your time at Harvard, and you asked and invited. So I am here. You know, when you're invited to a table, you're like, who all's coming?
Yes.
So out there, right? And when I heard who was coming, I was like, I want to be at that table. So excited to join you and the rest of your guests tonight.
Thank you so much. So what we're seeing is my heart, that to bring together all these voices and not sit here in this seat alone, like it's just been me the whole time. So it is just a heart of mine that I am enjoying seeing all this come together. I want to open by saying that when I first walked into HGSC, it was a rush. Everybody can remember us moving in, trying to figure out where we're going to live and trying to figure out the classes. And then I walk into the bottom of Gutman and I ask Liz, where is Longfellow? And then she not only tells me where it is, she walks me over there. And I kid you not, my heartbeat that was going fast, it stopped. I'm like, that's who I'm going to be like while I'm here. Okay. So then fast forward a few weeks later or a few days later, and we're now have chosen our advisors. And then we are now in our rooms. And first thing she says is one of the things that she and her co-author, Rachel Curtis, talks about when they open up their book is discern. And that is what she imparted to us as the first sound out of her mouth. And so I said, you mean we can discern like that word is used like? And so I just began following and following because it resonated with me why we are really here. We sense, we feel, we're human beings, we have lives, and we are able to use that as a leadership tool. So tonight is a full circle moment to be able to still be in this space once the book is finished, and we're going to cover it tonight. So, as I go ahead and get into this, my first question to you, Liz, is the Leadership Redemption Framework has four domains. One is resilient science. Next one is leadership preparation. The next one is delving into trauma informed recovery and healing centered flourishing. And I invited you here tonight to discuss the aspect that covers leadership preparation. And I wanted to know from you, for how important is leadership preparation to educators today and what we are needing to have to face and deliver ourselves as we're going through times of crises?
Well, there's kind of a myth of leadership that leaders are born, that people are natural leaders, that some people are leaders and some people aren't. But that's not the way I think about it. The way I think about it is everyone can be a leader. We can all grow in our leadership. We can grow leadership in other people. And I also think of leadership as a practice. And a practice, you have to practice, right? To get better at something. Like you're a singer, you spent hundreds, thousands of hours practicing singing. I just came from my grade six son's basketball practice, and those young people are earlier in their trajectory of practice, as was quite evident tonight. But um, you have to practice, and it really helps if you have somebody who's done it before, who knows something about it that you don't know, right? And so that they can accelerate your learning in some way, right? So the way I think about leadership preparation is how do we have everything not be learning by doing, right? How can we kind of accelerate people's learning and help them prepare, especially in a crisis situation, but help them prepare for things before they happen rather than you've got something coming at you and you have to kind of figure it out. So I think leadership preparation is important because it lets people tap into the best of themselves in the hardest times and then bring other people along with them.
That is amazing to me. So much of our career getting here to me has been a lot of lost and found. What sticks until we actually bring it together. So the point of making it a domain is to do exactly what you said, to try to stop some of that for a lot of leaders, especially frontline leaders who are not necessarily on the front lines because they love it. They have just been chosen for it, or they have just been that persistent that they're out there doing it. So I love your response in that it helps us rest a little bit that at some point we're going to figure this thing out. And at some point, everybody's going to be able to have this confidence. So, this gets me into your book, especially the title of the book, which is Leading Strategically. And the biggest part that made me love the book is achieving ambitious goals in education. So, this is pretty amazing because we, as artists, right? You have to be ambitious enough to think that you practice all those hours and then you have a concert hall filled with people who paid money. And then when you open your mouth or pick up your instrument, a sound needs to come out, right? So
Right.
I gravitated to your book, that main word. So you might have to back me down tonight with my excitement with how you guys came up with that. But here's what I want to ask you. Can you just generally tell us about the book and what brought you and your co-author Rachel Curtis to writing the book?
What the reason we wrote the book is because Rachel and I have worked with thousands of leaders over lots of years and in lots of different contexts. And we saw people struggling with some of the same challenges in many different organizational contexts. And we saw some leaders doing things very well. And we saw people burning out, and we thought, how can we help? Right? So, how is there a way we can help, particularly with Rachel and I had written a book about strategy. How do you make a strategy? Like figure out what are the things we're going to really focus on in order to achieve our ambitious goals. Um, but it turns out that even once you have that, leaders are making hundreds of decisions every day,
Mm.
just like teachers do. Like, and so how do you figure out, even when you have your overall strategy figured out, how are you making decisions all the time? This happens in our daily lives too, right? You sit down, you're like, I wanna watch a movie tonight, right? And then there's so many different movies you can watch, right? How do you decide? And so the leaders are making all kinds of decisions all day long. And we thought, is there a way we can help people solve some of the common challenges, move towards ambitious purpose, and figure out how to just sift through all the decisions they make in a way that's intentional, sustaining. Yeah, so that's kind of where we started is how can we help? And then we try to take a lot of complexity and kind of narrow it down into something that would be actually useful for people.
Mm. How long was this process for you all?
It was slower than I expected. Um, it was the slowest of my, I've written some other books. This one was the slowest. We spent a year, the first year I thought was going to be writing the book, but as it turned out, we spent the first year kind of trying to figure out what to put in the book and kind of how to put it together in a broad scale. And then the second year, we really wrote the book, got tons of feedback, revised more than I've ever revised anything in my life. And then it took just under a year between the time we turned the manuscript in and the time it came out. So it was kind of a 3 year process, but 2 years of really focused working on the book, and then kind of a lifetime of learning the things that show up in the book.
Yeah, yeah. I asked that question so we all can get a little bit of hope. Like for some of the things that's still on scratch paper or on sticky notes or some of the things that's still in our hearts and our minds. Um, I wanted to make sure to ask that question because you make it look so real and so achievable. And so I thank you for sharing that as well. I would like to ask you, the book emphasizes achieving ambitious goals. How do you define ambitious in today's educational climate?
It's a great question. At its simplest, for me, I always think a long time ago, I was a middle school, high school teacher and principal. And I think back to kids I worked with then. And the way I think about ambitious is think about the untapped potential in each child, and then what would need to be true for that child to reach that full potential. So ambitious for me, what always struck me both when I was in the classroom every day and then when I wasn't in the classroom every day and was trying to help people in classrooms and schools and systems was kids are capable of a lot more than we often give them credit for or make room for. And so for me, ambitious is sometimes it's getting out of the way of the kids, but
Okay.
it's really thinking about what's possible for kids, not dictated by the adults' lack of imagination, is what I would say,
Mhm.
or life experience that makes us think kids can and can't do something or other. I mean, my experience is most of the time, if you either get out of kids' way and they're really interested in something, or you set the bar really high and you help them get there, kids will blow you away. So that's what I think about as ambitious.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. To hear that particularly the aspect when you said the teachers getting out of the way. When we're thinking about leading strategically, the typical person is thinking about in the front, being out in front, making sure we tell everybody what to do, making sure they have marching orders, making sure, back in the day, you were growing up, the parents said don't embarrass the family when you leave the house, or when you're going to your teachers. As a leader, you're proud of your students, you're proud of everything, so when you're getting out there, the thing is to make sure you cover and protect them as a leadership strategy.
And what's so refreshing about your definition of ambitious and what you refer to as leaders, all leaders, is that it's not necessarily a position. It's not a chair you sit in. It's not behind a desk that you own with your nameplate on it. It is a lifestyle. It is a way of doing and being that really highlights and uplifts everybody around you, but mostly the students. So that's what I'm gaining from you and gaining also from the book. So my next question is now based on the framing of the book. First, we just talked about the context and bring it into context, a bit of history. How did this come into play? When we think about the word ambitious, that was, rain home for me. I feel like I'm really ambitious, but sometimes in the arts, you can be overly ambitious until you miss the mark. And sometimes you could be under ambitious until you go off the radar. And so I love the way now you guys put to me, when I'm reading it from my lens, from my framework, it gives me what I call guardrails. It helps me stay in the frame of trying to lead strategically. And so when it comes to the framework, you introduce a practical framework for strategic leadership. So what are key components that you would like the readers to focus on? And how do they differ from traditional leadership models?
Um, well, there's a lot of different leadership models out there,
Okay.
right? And any kind of framework, the way I think about frameworks is they kind of shine the light on some things and then other things are in the shadow, right? And no framework can do everything. They all have their limitations. What we tried to do was focus on for leaders at a variety of positional power kind of levels and a variety of places in an organization. Um, what is true for all of them, no
Mhm.
matter where they are leading. And so we settled after a lot of wrestling with complexity and winnowing things down. We settled on 5 elements.
Okay.
One of them you've already mentioned, which is discern.
Hmm.
Um, the second is cultivate relationships. You'll see that one in a lot of leadership frameworks because relationships are pretty foundational. We have a slight wrinkle in how we talk about ours, but discern, cultivate relationships, understand context and history, harness power, and think big, act small, learn fast.
Ooh.
So other leadership frameworks will shine their lights on different things, but we were kind of trying to keep in mind this notion of what would help people in their everyday work. And we actually think all of those things apply, as I said before, outside your professional life too, because we as my co-author and friend Rachel Curtis likes to say, we bring ourselves wherever we go, right? So the me at work that might avoid conflict is probably the me at home trying to avoid conflict too, right? Or the me at home who like really tries to build relationships with people I'm close with, probably I show up at work also oriented towards that. So not necessarily, sometimes we show up differently in different spaces, but um, those those elements are things that help us be also just healthy and whole, I think, in our lives. So yeah, that's in very short form, the 5 elements.
Those 5 elements, I think, were the main thing that caught my attention in terms of being able to find a lot of material as I'm writing up the leadership redemption framework. Because for me, especially the fifth component, to me, is what leadership redemption is talking about, which is preserving the mental health, well being, and lifespan of leaders on the front lines, leading change. And it's about resilience. And so the key components of the book, it is so striking. So that's what made me think about, well, how long did it take them to come up with each of these things? Because it seems like to me it builds upon one another in terms of what we can produce. Of course, it can be done interchangeably, but those 5 components of your book was so amazing. So that's why I wanted to include it here in the questions. So let's go on to talk about the approach that helps leaders move from a reactive state to problem solving, to intentional and strategic action, because that's what the book is about, helping us become strategic in our efforts to continue this work, to continue leading, and continue to do our best with the resources that we have, whether large or small.
Yeah, I think the moving from reactive to strategic to intentional is a lot about discern, actually. So
Okay.
discern is really about the pause, right? One of the things that's really hard when you're in a crisis, that's really hard when you're overextended, when you're tired, is pausing, just
Mm.
pausing. And we think about discern as having three big parts. One is discerning to identify purpose. So what is our North Star? Why are we here? Why are we doing this? And that keeps us anchored. Discerning to identify and understand root causes. So not just looking at what's the symptom of the thing I'm seeing, but what's underneath this, what's maybe less visible, what's causing this in a more deeply rooted, often systemic way. And then the last piece, once you've got those two figured out, where are we trying to go, kind of where are we now and why are we here, is discerning to choose right action. And we talk about right action as out of all the things we could do, using the best knowledge sources we have available to us, including, but not limited to, our intuition. How do we figure out our best idea from trying to get from here to there? So a lot of that, though, requires holding yourself steady, to not being kind of swept up in fear and anxiety, to kind of hold uncertainty, and often literally to breathe. I'm just going to
Mm.
pause and breathe here.
Mm. That touched me because that is my story, trying to breathe through the growing pains, trying to breathe through the, you say you have these big ticket items that you mentioned, so it's hard to move on to the next question. We haven't rehearsed anything, but I believe that it meets us at the table. Like your approach to leading, like meets us at a table where we can have a level playing field. We're trying to understand it. That's the beauty of this particular book. It helps us just dig a little bit deeper, kind of like pull back the scales, pull back a little bit of the shades, and say, oh, I think that's me. I think you're talking about me right there. And that question, the way you answer it, I got chills because I think that's what I did not do a lot, which led to a lot of anxiety, which led to a lot of when other podcasts, when I am talking to my colleagues, a stroke. It leads to all kinds of things that it seems so simple to breathe and pause, but it is the solution of the day. And oftentimes I'm wishing that that was something that I just knew was available to me. Because when you're in rural communities or adverse situations, or you're in grief, a lot of my stories that I've covered tonight, you'll hear from my colleagues. We've been in feel like a rat race, but we never gave up hope. So all the things you just said just touched me so deeply. So it's just hard to move on, but I'm going to move on. I am going to move on. Okay, I'm just going to do it. So thank you. Thank you for that. Would you care to share any specific moment in your own journey that you've had to bring this into action or into life in your own particular time, whether it was when you're a middle school teacher, as a mom, as growing into this senior lecturer? I mean, all these moments. Have you had one moment that stands out to you that you've had to bring this into focus for yourself?
Oh my gosh, all the time. I mean, my dad, who has known me longer than anyone, will tell you that the breathing and the prioritizing and the not doing too many things is not the daughter he knows, right? So
Okay.
I would say that's something I've kind of started to grow into over the last 5 to 10 years. Um, and really, as you're saying, give myself permission to actually not be busy all the time.
Mm.
I honestly couldn't be still for a long time, um, like I didn't like to do yoga before because I was like, this is much too slow. I need to be moving more, or just being able to sit. Like I'd have to knit or something just to sit still. But now, my friend Rachel, who's co-author, she said to me, so I think it was during COVID, I had a kindergartner and a second grader home, trying to teach online and have two little kids at home. And Rachel said to me, you could just sit and stare at the wall. And I was like, what? I can't sit and stare at the wall. Why would anyone ever do that? And what she meant was, she knew I would not literally sit and stare at the wall, but what she meant was, you don't have to be productive all the time. I had sort of this narrative in my own head that I had to be kind of productive for work, for home, I have so many things to do. I must fill all my time with them. But what I have found over the last, I would say, 7-ish years is the more space I create, the better I show up for myself, for other people, that I don't mind not having every single minute filled. Now I mind when every single minute is filled. I'm like, why did I do this to myself? I know better than this. Um, so I think part of that's less a moment than a kind of evolution. We have little mini cases in the book, and one of them is about a first year principal who is sitting in a meeting, and somebody who can fire her is basically like, I think we need to do something this way, and she doesn't like this. And in the case, she tries to kind of push back a little bit. It's not going anywhere, and she feels kind of like almost like this person is, kind of bullying me, right? And what she says is, well, if we do that, then I'm quitting. And this is a true story from
Okay.
my leadership. So we changed a lot of things in the story, because what happened was, in the early drafts, I actually had the real story in some of the early drafts. And what people said to us was, one, like, it's good to show yourself not being the most thoughtful leader, and it might actually be more accessible for people if you don't make it yourself.
Mm.
And then this was when I was 28 and I was a first year principal. And then they started telling me stories about how mistakes they had made when they were 28. Mistakes meaning like ways I showed up that I wouldn't show up that way now,
Mm.
and that I would have a different way of being in that situation now. And so it led me into this whole interesting conversation with a lot of people of, when you look back at your earlier leadership self, what's something um, that maybe you wouldn't handle the same way. And for me, that was like, you will not push me around or I'm out of here. And also, I thought it's really against my core values what this person is suggesting. But now I would look back and I would be like, that is so not a big deal, that thing you are, what I mean? It's like, of
Mhm.
all the things in the world, that's not the thing you need to be emphatic about. So there's things like that too, that I wish my 28-year-old self maybe had
Yeah.
a book, a mentor, or something kind of saying, you have choices. I mean, I think that's one of the main things is, you have choices. Take up your agency and make your choice, but do it after you've taken a breath and kind of checked in with yourself. And even if you're really upset, the main thing you need to do is not do anything just yet, most of the time, right? Like, you know, you're actually not getting attacked by a cheetah, right? Like, you
Yeah.
don't have to like fend that off. So, um, most of the time you can create some space for yourself to get that nervous system down and say, I have choices. What are my choices?
Mhm.
Um, so in the book, we use this framework in the cases of stop, opt, go, which is actually from the social thinking curriculum, and what a lot of young people are taught to do when they need to just kind of slow themselves down. And we thought, actually, this is fantastic for leaders, which is stop, opt, like figure out what are my choices, and then decide what you're going to do.
Mhm. I love that you drove that point to that, because that was another key moment for me. Because when I think about 28 years old, I was just getting married. I just bought a first home. I just became the music teacher, having set 300 kids a day. It's just one person in the room. One music teacher, 7 periods a day. The school is always on code red or something's happening. But guess what? if you talked about stop, opt, go, that was like thinking that you had a mental health. The word mental health was not thought of as healthy. So we are so fortunate to still be in the profession where that is an actual go to for us to stop, opt, go, for us to discern, for us. So it's like the book is so to me what we call in the Black church a right now word. It works right now. And that's to me what I took about the ambitious portion, the strategic portion, the leadership portion. This was like directing the choir, like, you go hear all the voices I'm hearing that makes it make sense for me. And the reason I paused here is for the listening audience and the viewing audience to find themselves in this work, to find yourself somewhere because Liz and I are not that. I'm always going screen saying I'm 47. You do not have to go on screen saying how old you are, Liz.
Oh, I don't mind telling people how old I am.
Okay,
I had to
go for
pause
it.
for a second, just make sure I've got it down. 53. I'm 53.
Okay.
50s are awesome. That's why I don't mind telling people because the 50s are awesome. So I highly recommend them.
Well, I'll see you
Um,
in a few years.
you'll see me in a few years. I have a funny story about this actually. I don't know if it's at all related to what we're talking about, but I think it is.
Okay.
So, um, long ago when I was working in the Boston Public Schools, I was in my, say, I think, yeah, my early 30s. And I worked with a lot of women in their 50s, just how it happened. I was working with a lot of women in their 50s. They're mostly African American women. And they
Hmm.
would sit around and they would say, man, the 50s are awesome. I can say what I want. I can do what I want. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna worry about what other people think. And here I am in my early 30s, and I remember thinking, oh, I can't wait to be in my 50s because because I didn't feel that way. I didn't feel like I can say what I want. I can do what I want. I don't really care what other people think. And I've been looking forward to my 50s ever since. And sure enough, that's how I feel in my 50s, I mean, it's just it's a time of letting go of sort of worrying about how other people are perceiving me and just being much more content in my own self. And yeah, it's kind of nice. So anyway, I
Yeah.
totally derailed wherever you were going with our
No,
ages,
no, no,
but there you
no.
go.
You did. It's right there because, with turning 50 is you're 25 years old twice at one time. So that 25-year-old, that close to 28, right? That 25-year-old is present, but then you also have another 25 years that you put combined. And so it makes everything make sense. And so your permission slips are all signed by then.
That's a good way to think about it. Exactly. Or you're very comfortable just forging them at that point and saying,
Yes.
give myself permission, writing your own permission slip. Maybe not forging is probably not the right word, but I'm giving myself permission. I don't need to wait for somebody else to give me permission.
Yes, yes. So now I want to get into the strategic part of the book. We talked about the context, we talked about the framework and the framing. I call it a framework. I'm not sure if you guys literally consider it a framework, but to me, it
We
framed
did when
the.
we were writing it, but then people who saw it started calling it that. And I was like, oh, I guess it is a framework. Yeah, okay.
All right, so I'm not far off. I just wanted to make
No,
sure since I'm a
no.
framework brain. Okay, so then now we want to start drawing down on specific part of the book on strategic leadership, leading strategically. So the book is designed for leaders at all levels, from teachers to superintendents. So how can classroom educators apply strategies in their own sphere? So the question is not talking about a particular case example, but when you guys were writing the book, what were you thinking about in terms of how can classroom educators apply these strategies in their own field?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, really effective classroom teachers are doing all of these things anyway. They're usually thinking about it in the context of the students, right? So when I'm discerning, I'm trying to think about what's the goal of this lesson, this unit, and where is their struggle? Where are there things kids don't understand yet? And what are we going to do to try to help them get where we're trying to go? And relationships really key in the classroom. All of those things effective teachers are already doing all those things. I think what we were inviting teachers to do is think of beyond your own classroom, what are the ways you can influence outside the walls of your own classroom. So is it in your teacher team? Is it at, the school leadership team, instructional leadership team, whatever your school calls it? How can you think about bringing your expertise, usually with more informal authority than with
Mm.
positional authority? How do you take that up? And how do you think, I don't need to necessarily be the principal in order to influence what's happening at the school, right? Because every school has teachers who are influencing a lot of what is happening without a lot of formal authority. The ones that people are going to go check in with, the ones who, if they like it or don't like it, that's going to sway a lot of the faculty, right? The ones who, when you get them on board and excited about something, then other people are going to do the same, right? So I think the book is inviting people to take up that agency, and also here's some help for how to do that if that's something new to you. So there's a lot of questions in the book, because one of the things we think strategic leaders do is ask a lot of questions and then listen really well,
Mm.
right? So as a teacher, as a superintendent, as a nonprofit leader, you don't have to have the answers. You have to have some questions and some interest in hearing what other people have to say. So those are some of the ways I think about the classroom teachers part of it.
Mhm. The next part of the question for me is if I find myself doing that as an informal leader. Okay, so that was one of the best parts about me taking the journey to Harvard because I went through the professional education um, program first. And in the school leaders and managers certification certificate, that's one of the major things that was discussed in former leadership. But what if you don't have the courage to do that informal leadership and you want to lead strategically? The next question then talks about what are some of the pitfalls leaders face when trying to do that you've discovered? And then, how's the book helping us have that courage to actually take on this agency?
Well, I think for me, courage and skill are related to each other, right? So I partially think about this when my each of my children were learning to walk. Well, my older child had the skill to walk, right about when the developmental milestones, yearish, whatever. She didn't have the courage to do it until she was about 16 months old, right? So she spent, in the span of her rather short life to that date, like she spent a lot of that time being just kind of afraid to, take the hands off something and just go. And then my younger child, her brother, he had the courage, and then the skill just kind of came along after, he was like, we're just gonna go for it. Like I'm just gonna climb the thing. I'm gonna go for it. And then the skill came along. And so in my own kind of leadership trajectory and then helping a lot of other leaders grow, I've seen this like interesting relationship between courage and skill. The more skill we have, the easier it is to have a little more courage about it, right? You're like, I kind of think I know how to do this, right? But it can also work to just, I've got a bunch of courage and I'm just going to figure it out as I go, right? I'm going to develop that skill as I go. And so I think either within ourselves or when we're trying to help other leaders grow, we're trying to help them with that mix of things, right?
Mm.
Having some more skill might give you some more confidence. So the book has a lot of tools, a lot of protocols, some questions to ask, some like pretty practical things you could do, right? A lot of times we need to make this pretty concrete, right? Being strategic is kind of a big abstract concept, but hey, you could use this little tool that help you prioritize, or you could ask this question that might, move the conversation in a different way. But if you've got somebody who's got a bunch of, courage, they just need a little bit of the skill, or they don't have the courage, but they have the skill. It's like, well, now we're going to try to practice something small, which is one of the elements, right? Think big, act small. So, and making it okay to learn fast, which also means we're going to make mistakes and not do everything as well as we might want.
I think that's your next book.
Which one?
The courage and skill. The courage and
Oh,
skills.
yeah, maybe.
That is wonderful. That resonates with me. It makes sense because a lot of times in leadership, people thinking about that pyramid. And when they're thinking about the pyramid, they're thinking about climbing up to the pinnacle of that pyramid. But sometimes, those triangles flip on the pinnacles on the bottom. The tip is on the bottom. So you're not sure what that is. And so it just seems like you have to balance or practice courage in that way, or you will sink or swim, But then what you're saying to me, as I am translating what you're saying, being able to flip that thing back on its bottom, no matter which direction you're facing, that courage and skill need not be afraid to have them in the same space. Because to me, I put skill over here. I'm like, let me put my courage over here so I can practice this. Or let me have courage and then I will get the skills over here. And so I am really transformed by that myself and will definitely not do that anymore.
Yeah, increasing one helps you with the other one, right? So if you're like, I'm going to go work on my skill, well, then you'll probably help your courage, right?
Ooh.
Yeah, so they definitely are related to each other, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So the final question for this particular portion of the podcast is in light of the ongoing crises, the pandemic recovery, social unrest, and systemic inequities, how can your book be a tool for resilience, renewal, and redemption when it comes to leading strategically? And specifically, I'm asking about the chapter also in the book as well that really actually touches on some of the same things. So any insights that you can share with us here?
Mm, I mean, I think the whole book is trying to help with that in various ways. And part of it is saying lots of things are always happening at the same time, right? I think one of the things I always try to remember about being strategic or just leading in general is multiple things can be true at the same time, right? We don't have to make things either or. We don't have to sort of put things in a box to try to understand them. A lot of what we have to do is hold multiple things at the same time and hold steady in that. And so I think the book is trying to help affirm that there's lots in play all the time. And sometimes one thing is more in play than another. And so having language and names for things like, oh, I really didn't like to harness power early in my leadership, but I've come to see it as something that's happening all around me anyway. And if I'm trying to push against status quo and get somewhere where we haven't, been before, I'm probably going to need to mobilize some power. So how do I do that? It's not necessarily my power, but how am I allying? When I do have power, am I sharing it? Am I seeding it? All those things. So I think it's part of what the book is trying to do is give people language for things they kind of feel in their bodies and in their spirits and say, if we can name it, we can talk about it, we can grow it, we can celebrate it, we can sort of gently pat ourselves when we're not doing that one as well. So that's mostly how I mean, there's lots of practical, like, you can take this out of the book and try it kinds of things, but I think what it's really trying to do is say, there's a lot going on when you're leading, especially when you're leading in crisis, and you've if you can name the things for yourself and give you space to slow down and choose what you want to do, then you'll probably be able to stay in it longer and healthier.
Excellent. Liz, thank you so much for joining us at the table for the book talk portion of the podcast. And I want to make sure the audience is still with us. So Liz came to the table for me. That's what she said. She said it was me, relationships. That's what I heard her say it. Okay. So, but as she's at the table, it is the leadership redemption framework that was in her office on her desk. When I first came to Harvard, I went straight to her office, pulled out my iPad and said, "Hey, this is the thing I want to do while I'm here." Then the podcast idea was one day I was in office hours and I was talking to her and reading a letter of what I want to write to leaders one day. She said, "Why don't you sing it? Why don't you turn it into a podcast? Why don't you do something with it?" And bam, this is the Table of Redemption podcast. I promise you, she was there. So I want to make sure we're understanding that a part of leadership preparation is being prepared to lead and
Mm.
then leading and then also being prepared for whatever comes along with the territory. It's almost like there's never no right answer. which is why I love her book, Leading Strategically, Achieving Ambitious Goals in Education. Now, we went on to talk about the components of the book. My favorite one was the discern. Okay. So that's a big part of mine and all the other components that you've heard her talk about. I don't want to rehash everything because you need to buy the book. You don't need to sit on the podcast and listen to everything I'm saying and not go buy the book. Okay. So I'm just trying to let y'all know. Okay. So then we go on to the framework that in terms of the strategic leadership component, she talked a lot about the informal and formal leadership qualities that are inside of each of us. And that the book is trying to empower us to use the agency we already have, meaning that you don't have to go buy a new one. You know how you get ready to go to one of those parties and you think you need to buy a new dress? Sometimes you might want to go ahead and look in your closet one more time and see what you really have. And to me, leading strategically, the book is trying to get you to look more introspectively at what you have around you and be ambitious about achieving those goals. Then we talk about strategy. One of the big takeaways for me is when she talked about both her older and younger child being able to have the courage and skill grow up together and basically fill that out and have the room enough to explore so you can become that particular leader that you desire to be. And she put strategy and skill, she put skill and courage together to me as a bona fide strategy that's easy breezy and beautiful. You can use that at any given time. Well, everybody, it is that time. It's a sad time because we have to close, but it's a glad time because we will be able to rest well knowing that we made it to the table tonight. I do not discount at all the sacrifices that everyone is making to support me in this endeavor. And while this is mutual benefit and there's nothing else exchanged but just support and love for one another's dreams and goals, it's a currency for me. It's a currency for me having your support, having your love, having your words of wisdom, having your insights, having my back, while this work is being done, because it is scary sometimes getting up in the middle of our current administration, getting up in the middle of a time when everything seems to be falling apart and said, I want to do a podcast and I want to build bridges. And like, what do you mean building bridges? Aren't the bridges falling? Well, no, not this one. And so tonight, this is what we've accomplished. We're building bridges between the leadership redemption framework and also leading strategically. Then leading strategically is building a bridge between all the stories to me that are case examples that still sit in the earth as plausible, real life things that we can and should be doing. And the thing I try to do with the framework is keep it as simplistic, doable, and achievable as possible to make sure dialogues like this are not forced and no one feels intimidated or no one feels like they're less than. We can actually have this space. So, to you, Liz, my closing question is what makes you ambitious? What makes you feel hopeful about the future of education moving forward?
Well, those are two different questions. So, what makes me ambitious, I think, is what many of you just spoke to about the times we're in, the the status quo is not okay, right?
Mm.
And so to me, we need real ambition to counteract that. Um, what gives me hope? I mean, tables like this give me hope. I think
Okay.
people showing up in their humanity and inviting other people to do the same and loving each other and being curious and all of those things. I mean, there's not everything that we want to fix, we can fix, right? But we can build those bridges, we can build those relationships, we can show up for people and together try to figure out something that we can do. And so it always gives me hope when um, I see people interacting who really see each other and love and respect each other. I feel like that's where it all starts, right? And that's also what gets us through hard times. So y'all are giving me hope.
Oh, I'm about to cry over here. So, Liz, I always ask all of my guests at the end, one, is there anything you're taking away from the table? I think what you just said is what you're taking away, the hope and ambition. And thank you for splicing that up for me between hope and ambition, because when I'm hearing it back, that's exactly different. It's different, and I'll do that from now on. But the next thing, is there any thoughts that you're leaving on the table? Anything that's resonating with you? Anything you're currently working on that you want to leave on the table and we should follow up on, or anything that you have that you're leaving on the table or resting with?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question. Hmm. I think this piece that my fellow table mates were talking about, how do we how do we kind of look inward and then kind of look inward and connect with each other, right? I mean, this isn't a new thing I'm leaving on the table. I'm just sort of repeating a version of what I just said. But I think what's really striking me in the moment is, um, this notion, Harvard didn't make us, that stuck with me. I was like, no, it didn't. Harvard did not make y'all, you know? And I'm so glad you said that. And I'm so glad you feel on the other side of your time at Harvard that you you are who you brought in, and then hopefully can keep becoming the person you want to become, right? I'm hoping that what Harvard helps you do is keep becoming the person you want to become and serve the world in the ways you want to serve. Um, and so maybe that's it. Maybe that's just a an ambling way of saying, I think one of the things about Harvard is it is a place of great privilege. And
Yes.
the way I think about that, I never expected to be at Harvard as a faculty member, and certainly not to stay as long as I have. And part of what keeps me there is that ambition I have for what's possible for children, and where can I serve in a way that will help us move towards that. And part of why I stay at Harvard is I feel like part of my role is helping, like, make all those privileges accessible to a lot of people so that we can all then, you know, pay that privilege forward and serve, right? And so I guess that's a sort of jumble. It's been a long day, so maybe I would have said that a little more concisely earlier in the day, but there's something about sort of owning our responsibility to try to make the world better in community, because that's the only way to do it. So that's
Yeah.
what I think.
Yeah, it's supposed to be jumbly because you're leaving it. And and one of the things that, I took leading strategically and then also leading change. And then we did the independent study of human intuition, and you said expect non-closure.
That's right. Glad
That's
to
it.
feel in others, learn that
Yes.
from them. Yep.
Yes, yes. The final question is, do you have any words of encouragement, or inspiration for me as I continue this journey of building bridges, finishing up the Leadership Redemption Framework, bringing people together, and doing it afraid?
Well, it's so fun for me to see you shine. It's so
Oh,
fun for me to see you taking up that privilege and responsibility with joy. And I have said this to you before, sitting in my office at Harvard, but you are so agile with the metaphor. I love listening to you just in the moment make connections and turn that into metaphor that then makes a pretty abstract thing, like something you can put your hands around. So I think that's a particular gift of yours, but mostly I just want to say, it's fun to see you shine and keep on shining.
thank you so much. Thank you. Well, to our guests, thank you so much for joining us at the table of redemption. I always say that I hope that at the table that you have been well fed at this table. And well fed meaning that you have ordered what you want, ordered up those ambitious goals, you have ordered up your own steps, that you are figuring this thing out. After this particular podcast airs, I hope you're somewhere writing something down. I hope you're typing something. I hope you're calling a friend. I hope you're working on your idea that you said you was going to do. I hope that by
by my colleagues and podcast guests. You'll go back and listen to their stories and be inspired. That's another way of feeding your spirit, feeding your soul, and feeding your mind to get some of those things that are inside of you outside of you. The next thing I always say is, what are you doing to change the world, to make it a better place? And whatever that is, I'm going to find you, because I want you to be at this table, the table of redemption. Thank you all so much for being here. Signing off as Rasheen Jamison-Richardson, podcast host, founder, and producer. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Night.
The Table of Redemption podcast disclaimers. Views expressed, branding, and mutual benefit. The Table of Redemption podcast is part of the collaborative refinement phase of the Leadership Redemption Framework before it goes to market. This is a research-based initiative led by myself, Rasheen Jamison-Richardson, your host. Guest participation contributes to scholarly exploration through narrative inquiry and receives platform exposure in return. Rasheen, myself, do not receive financial compensation from guest appearances or their affiliated work. This project is not formally endorsed by Harvard University, Harvard Graduate School of Education, or any institution or any sponsorships at this time. Any reference to anyone's brand, including Harvard's brand, are solely based on my academic experiences as a graduate student and now an alumni, and I do not imply institutional affiliation or approval on any of the content that I am producing. This is all my original work, designed, built, and invented by me across a 20-year experience as an educator and practitioner and researcher. All stories remain the intellectual property of the guest and are shared with mutual respect, transparency, and the shared goal of building bridges of hope and redemption in times of crisis. To continue following the Table of Redemption podcast, you may visit www.thetableofredemption.com.